Amy! Hi everyone, welcome back to Sewing 101 episode 12. In this video, I'll be showing you how to sew an all-in-one facing. Instead of just folding your seams like this and then like this, you know, that's not really like a clean finish, nice professional way. So to clean finish it, you're going to use a facing. So it's like the same pattern that you used to cut the bodice, but you're going to cut it twice and a little bit smaller for the inside. One that I'm showing you in this video is an all-in-one facing that covers the neckline and the armhole in one piece. If you're just to do a neckline facing, it would just be the inside like this. So it would be a little bit shorter than your shoulder, and that would just cover the front and the back neckline only. And that's good if you're gonna do like sleeves. And then the armhole facing is just this area on the armhole. In this episode, we're not using little squares. We're actually gonna use a pattern. So check the link in the description box to see the pattern that I made. And yes, I made the pattern for my class in school. Don't worry about the size and if it's going to fit you or not, because this is just to practice with. You can make your own pattern facing whenever you make like even a commercial pattern or any pattern that you make that fits yourself. You can make a facing pattern from that pattern. Feel free to print the one that I made in the description box to start off with. Let's get started with the tutorial. Check the link in the description box to print all the pattern pieces. Cut the pattern pieces on the seam allowance and use tape to put them together. Here I'm showing you how I connect the 3 pieces for the front bodice with the French dart. Line up the lines and markings and make sure it's all aligned. The points on the dart should line up right on top of each other. Cut out the French dart. Use a ruler to cut out the center front to make a straight line. When you cut and tape the pattern, your pattern should be exactly like the one I originally made. The pattern is already done for you, but when making your own front facing, you want the seam allowance to be 1/16 smaller from the 1/4 inch seam allowance on the neck and armholes. Then you cut a scoop any length you want. The seam on the back is called a princess seam. The darts are cut out at the top and bottom, hence the curvy seam. This is to shape the back of the body. When the princess seam is sewn, the back facing will fit perfectly. When making your own facing, you want the underarms to be the same length on the front and back. The length on the front and back necklines do not have to be the same length. Place the center front bodice on fold and trace. Place some tracing carbon paper under the pattern and use a tracing wheel to trace out the dart. Don't forget to mark the front notch on the arm. Turn your fabric over and transfer the dart markings and the notches to the other side. This is how it should look like so far. Mark your wrong side so you don't get your pieces confused. Place the front facing on fold, trace and cut. Don't forget to mark the notches on the facing just like the one you did for the bodice. The bottom of the facing can be finished using a serger or a seam. Make sure it's finished before you start sewing, but if you're just doing this on muslin, you can leave it raw. Cut 2 pieces for each of the back pieces. The back pieces will be double notched. Mark the wrong sides. Line up the notches and pin the side back and center back pieces together. Place them right sides together and sew with 1/2 inch of seam allowance. Don't forget to backstitch the beginning and the end. For the purpose of this tutorial, I'm using black thread so you can see all my stitches. Press the way you sewed, then press the seam allowance towards the side of the body. Fold the dart right sides together and line up the dots using pins. Check both sides to make sure the dots are aligned. Sew along the dotted line. Backstitch the widest part of the dart. Do not backstitch the point of the dart. Instead, leave long tails to tie some knots. This will create less bulk and give a cleaner look. Try to get the needle in on the last dot as close to the edge of the fabric as possible. Tie like 2 or 3 knots. Press the way you sewed, then press the seam allowance down towards the ground. Place the bodice shoulders right sides together with the back shoulders. Sew both shoulders with 1/2 inch of seam allowance. Press the way you sewed, then press open the seam allowance. Take the shoulders of the front facing and back facings and place them right sides together. Sew both shoulders with 1/2 inch of seam allowance. Press the way you sewed, then press the seam allowance open. Now place the facing and bodice right sides together. Start by pinning the shoulder seams, then continue pinning the rest. Make sure to line up both seam allowances even though the facing is 1/16 smaller. Sew around the neckline with 1/4 inch seam allowance. Straighten the neckline as you're sewing to get around the curve easily. Use the edge of your presser foot to line it up with the edge of the seam allowance, just as long as it's 1/4 inch. Press the way you sewed, then press the seam allowance towards the facing. The next stitch you'll be doing is called an understitch. An understitch is a stitch line close to the edge of the facing to keep it from rolling towards the outside. Sew on the right side of the facing close to the edge, catching the seam allowance at the bottom. Flatten out your fabric as you're sewing to prevent any unwanted folds getting stitched. Now press the facing at the seam line. Fold the shoulders at the seam line where you pressed. Place them right sides together and pin along the armholes. Line up the seams and the notches. Sew along the armholes with 1/4 inch seam allowance. Press the way you sewed, then understitch the armholes the same way as a neckline, except you will have to stop at the shoulder seam and switch over to the other side and meet at the shoulder seam. Sew as close to the seam as possible and make sure to flatten out your fabric so you don't get any unwanted folds stitched up. Stop at the shoulder seam and backstitch. Switch over to the other end and continue understitching. Stop when you reach the other stitch and backstitch at the shoulder seam. Do this twice to both armholes. Turn the whole thing right side out. Press all your seams. Place the underarm seams right sides together, pin and sew. Sew along the whole side with 1/2 inch of seam allowance. Press all your seams till everything is wrinkle-free. Then you want to tack down the underarm facing to the side seam allowance. You can hand stitch it or you can backstitch it on a sewing machine. Now the underarm facing won't flip over to the outside. Now you can add facings to all your garments you make. You'll impress everyone with your great sewing skills. Just keep practicing and don't ever give up. I hope you enjoyed this Sewing 101 episode. Thumbs up this video if it was helpful. In the next Sewing 101 episode, I'm going to show how to add either an invisible zipper, most likely invisible zipper, or just like a regular zipper on the back of this bodice that we practiced with. Because I know with garments, when you make a facing and in the back, you usually add a zipper in the back. So I'll be showing you how to do an invisible zipper in the back with this out of the same pattern. So if you practice with this pattern and you finished it, save it and leave this raw in the back so you can practice making an invisible zipper on the same piece. If you like to keep up with me, you can follow me on my social medias like Instagram at Crafty Amy and Facebook at Crafty Amy 93, and I also have a vlog channel, so I'll link that in the description box. It's Crafty Amy's Vlogs. Subscribe if you haven't already, and thank you for watching.